It's a theological world. After all, after all, after all, after all.
Welcome again. We are discussing paganism today. I think it was said that by Chesterton that paganism was one of the largest things in the world, but Christianity was even larger. And everything since has been comparatively small. But what if paganism isn't returning as a single kind of organized religion? What if it's returning as a mood, a logic, a set of practices that people are absorbing without even realizing what they're doing? Here's what I mean. In the US, about 28%, 30%, roughly speaking, you can look at the Pew reports and other reports, now identify as religiously unaffiliated or nuns. In parts of the UK, quote unquote, no religion is now a massive block, 37% approximately in England and Wales, quite large. And Scotland has reported a majority identifying with no religion. And even where there is traditional Christianity, where it remains culturally strong, like in parts of Latin America, Pew surveys have documented significant Catholic decline and growth in the unaffiliated, or maybe the nuns is the right category. So the question isn't simply, are more people becoming pagans? The deeper question is, where's the spiritual hunger going, and what forms is it taking? Wicca may be one visible stream, but it sits in a river system that includes New Age, wellness mysticism, Eastern spirituality imports, occult practices, arguably, going mainstream and growing suspicion of institutions side by side with it, religious institutions and otherwise. So tonight we're going to name that river system, not to panic, not to mock, but to understand it better, and to ask what serious Christian responses look like in this kind of re-enchantment age, you might say, this desire to re-enchant. So I think as at least one Christian response, I think that's important, that is not just reactionary, is that we should affirm that there is a hunger out there. There is a spiritual hunger or a yearning for something else. People want some kind of enchantment. They want some kind of transcendence, cleansing, community, meaningful frameworks that they can live their lives in and from. We want to name the substitution. When God is removed, particularly kind of traditional God or Christian God or something near it, people don't become neutral. They become ritualistic in different ways or new ways. They trade it out for something else. And we want to at least gesture in a direction of offering an alternative, a thicker alternative that we suggest is better, more sufficient. You might say more sufficient. It's sufficient for living life and living well, living life and living a flourishing life, where prayer is communion, not just technique. Sacrament is as a reality is not just aesthetic. Repentance is not just shame, but it's actually liberation. It brings about real and true freedom in the life of human beings. And so these are the kinds of things that we want to discuss today. So what we're suggesting is that, and I think we all agree on this, we could talk about it, the modern person didn't stop worshiping. Modern person doesn't stop worshiping. They've just stopped calling it worship, at least in the traditional sense. They're trying to seek for or gesture for something else, something other, something alternative in the rejection of traditional, what might be conceived of as more traditional religion, Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, or one of the monotheistic religions. So we're going to look at paganism today in a bit more detail, particularly Neo-Paganism and how it's creeping up and how it's permeating the discourse today in a variety of ways and contexts, politically, philosophically, and social discussions, global discussions. Here's a statement to think about, and I wonder what you guys think about it as we move into defining paganism and neo-paganism and what we mean by that. Is something like this, right? Neo-paganism is a kind of modern re-enchantment as identity, as practices built from ritual, nature sacralization, and spiritual power outside of historic Christianity or some kind of traditional religion. So what do you think about that? And what do we make of paganism or neo-paganism? What is it? Let's talk about that first.
Great questions. I appreciate the definition that you bring to the table. I think that's important. And it is multifaceted. It does contain that element of nature worship. It is ritualistic. It attempts to pull from ancient pagan practices and ancient pagan beliefs. It is you could maybe look at it along the lines of, how would I describe this? Myth made functional.
Mm.
And you bring these elements into play with the search for and the hunger for some spiritual experience, something transcendent, something that's going to now move you out of your normal life patterns and allow you to feel something deeper than yourself, connecting to something greater than yourself. And it is very much has that feeling orientation. Indeed, when you go through the literature, you're going to see it many times, and I've seen this as well going to different pagan events where the question of authenticity comes into play. And oftentimes it's framed within the concept of, well, if you feel it, and so there's a lot of question marks in terms of authenticity, and yet at the same time, it's placed now on the individual that you're the one who authenticates this new religious experience. It's morphing. It has changed tremendously in the last 80 years.
Yeah. What's that song, that famous song was in the 80s or 90s, Listen to Your Heart?
Listen to your heart.
Is that the...
Sheryl Crow, If It Makes You Happy.
It makes you happy.
If it makes you happy, it can't be so bad.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's one I used.
That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that everything that Carl said. Absolutely. The desire for a re-enchanted world. Of course, that goes back again to Max Weber, who we mentioned in the previous episode, and his idea that, at least at the level of the academic institutions, the world was being treated and would continue to be treated as an impersonal object that we could analyze through instrumental reasoning and the tools of science and sort of exhaustively explain, and in so doing, eliminate all mystery and mysticism from our lives, right, or our experiences. And as I argued in the last episode, I don't think that lasted very long. And I don't think it ever really filtered down all the way throughout the culture, even though it did have some impact, obviously. But we posit that man is religious man. Man is homo religiosus, as kind of you mentioned at the beginning of your introduction. As Chesterton pointed out, everything else seemed comparatively small, to paganism and Christianity. And Chesterton was usually very insightful on these things. So already in the 1960s, I think we're seeing the more, direct sort of expression of the need for religious experience, right? And that has got to be sensible and sensate. There's a desire, of course, to break away and break out of the dogmatism, the doctrinal religions of Judaism or Christianity, but basically Christianity in the West. And as Carl pointed out, the validity of the beliefs are commensurate to the intensity of the religious experience. One thing that is different, as Carl also mentioned, even in comparison to like maybe late 19th and early 20th century pagan revival in the area of like witchcraft and magic, is the emphasis on the individual, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, one discontinuity between what we might say is pre-modern or classical paganism, and really any religion really, is the emphasis on the autonomous individual as opposed to the group culture, the corporate culture. So it's the individual experience, and then the capacity for the individual to sort of cobble together the religious world that he or she desires, that works for them. So there's almost a pragmatic kind of aspect to neo-paganism as well. Do what works for you. It's not nearly as tied in together, although we could get this later, to ethnic group or some other sort of like cultural entity. Although there have been examples of that in the not so distant past of paganisms that really were tied in with ethnicity. The most obvious one, of course, was Hitler's Third Reich. But in America, especially, the emphasis on the individual and the individual experience, religious experience, I think, is at the forefront of contemporary paganism.
And to that point, and that's really important, Anthony, is there is a shift, a marketable shift in neo-pagan practice by the 1980s and into the early 1990s. Before that, if you took a look at it from the 60s and 70s especially, it was closed covens. It had a type of lineage authority. There was an initiation that was required within the context of a gathering or a group. Secrecy was involved. By the time the early 1990s, mid 1990s comes around, there's a shift. And a lot of it is because of the work, I think, of Scott Cunningham. He really opened up the conversation as a pagan around the concept of being the sole practitioner, what that would look like. And so now it's you can still join a coven, you can still belong to that group. There's a lot of that at the same time. It's more about an open network. The sole practitioner, eclectic witchcraft, all now has relevancy within the larger context of the neo-pagan world. It's about the personal authority, the personal experience, less than the group context, which, of course, in the 60s and 70s was paramount. Self-initiation. Today, that's a big deal. You don't even need to do the 3 initiations of Wicca anymore. At least that's the apparency of it. You can engage within a self-system of initiation. And it moved from being kind of fixed to being very mobile and modular. And it moved from secrecy to publication. Now it's open. It's everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. And there may still be some debate in pagan communities over things like authority figures, hierarchical structures. I mean, really, just look. We have similar debates, right? Is it a shamanism of all believers, or is there like a shamanistic hierarchy, et cetera, et cetera? So we shouldn't be. It shouldn't take us by surprise that we find these kinds of issues being hashed out in paganism, and there's developments and counter developments. And the further back you go in recent history, I think you do see more authoritative structures, hierarchical structures within the covens, within the Church of the Goddess, or whatever it may be. Yeah, but everything has become more individualized, more customized, more tailored to the individual sensibilities, desires, lifestyle, right? And again, I'm always going to kind of come back to this. I think, certainly technology has had some role in that for all of us. It has affected us.
Yeah, that's good.
One other thing I just want to point out at the early start here too, that I just want to make sure everybody listening to this understands. The one perhaps most significant discontinuity between any classical paganism or pre-modern paganism that we might encounter either in the pages of the Bible or the annals of history of religion, folk religion studies, is that the neo-paganism that we've seen develop in the West, especially since the late 1900s, and then migrate over, is very much in direct rejection of Christianity. right? That's obviously not the case when Paul's on Mars Hill, right? Preaching to the Greek and Roman pagans. They've never heard the name Jesus before. So one thing I think we always have to take into account, and Carl has noted often that so many of the neo-pagan believers and practitioners that he encounters are former Christians of some sort, right? So neo-paganism in Europe and in America has been constructed, almost all of it have been constructed also as an alternative and as a rejection of Christianity. And that we can't take that for granted, that that's part and parcel of neo-paganism.
Okay, good. So what is you brought to mind a lot of things, and I don't want to jump ahead of myself. I mean, I'm thinking of all sorts of things. I mean, is this development toward neo-paganism that's much more egalitarian, much more individualistic, rejection of authority, a kind of autonomous ethics? We can have our kind of a la carte buffet style paganism that is catered to our own interests and sentiments and hedonistic desires. I mean, you have, I was thinking while you were talking about these different rituals, rites of not having to go through the initial older initiations, but you could self-initiate, as it were. Is that just a feature of individualism, autonomy, or is there something else going on? Like, I'm thinking of, like, there was this new trend, like I can get married to whoever I want, or I could marry myself, which to me sounds ludicrous, absolutely ridiculous. But you could, this was a new thing. I thought it was like, you had like these humanistic marriages, right? Where you have some kind of secularized rite of marriage initiation that de-godded the ceremony or something, and made it, purely secular, but it still had the kind of artificial resonance with old Christian, ceremonies and the like. And then that developed in more recent history, it seems, into this marrying the self. Is that just a feature of our culture of a radical egalitarianism, radical individualism, or is there something behind the scenes that's somehow rooted in this kind of, not just secularism, but this kind of paganism?
So I'll quickly, this is just some thoughts on this, and I may be wrong. Yes, definitely the sense of selfism that we have seen flourish with the human potential movement in modern psychology plays a role. There's no question about that. However, there's something else about paganism, neo-paganism, that most people don't realize, especially in the Christian community. We don't consider it, but that is, this is a new religious movement. It's new. We're talking about something that really only developed in the late 1930s, early 1940s, and started to really mold itself into existence by the 1950s. This is truly, really a new religious movement. It's also, by the way, probably Britain's last real export of a religious sense of spirituality. I mean, this is really, especially the Wiccan side, is a British construct through the work primarily of Gerald Gardner. But it is relatively new. So it's in a period of flux. It has been really since the 1940s. From the 40s to the 60s, you see that there's kind of a continuity of the idea. It's fresh, it's new. They work within the coven, they work within the group. It's more secret. In fact, it wasn't until I believe 51 or 52 when England dropped its repealed its Witchcraft Act. So there was always this, at that point, there was always a sense of this is a closed, secretive system. But then it changes, and you actually see it change roughly every 15 to 20 years. You see some significant internal cultural changes within the neo-pagan movement. So keeping in mind, it's a new religious movement, it's in flux, It definitely will flow with the patterns of modern culture, including that sense of selfism, that sense of human potential. Whereas from the Christian point of view, we already have basically 2,000 years. And if you go back before that into the Old Testament, we have this lengthy period of time where we have been fleshing it out, wrestling it out, working it out, continually engaging, but yet remaining firm on the fundamentals. For the most part, this is something we can have different, maybe flavors, but we remain firm on the fundamentals. We understand the fundamentals. We know who Jesus Christ is. We understand the nature of God, the sin of man. We bring all those into play, and we have something that we could look back upon, even to, let's say, our brethren 500 years ago, 800 years ago, 1,000 years ago, when we go, oh, very different culture, but we recognize the fundamental nature and the truth of the biblical claims being made, whereas within the Neo-Pagan community, there is no Bible per se, and it is new, and so it is in that developmental stage, a very important developmental stage, and there has been some radical transformations in terms of the nuances of paganism, even in the last 25 years.
Ah, wow. Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. Yeah, so in light of what you just said, what makes someone neo-pagan then? There's something amorphous about it, something boundary open. There's kind of these open boundaries. What makes one a neo-pagan? Beliefs, practices.
Before we go on there, I do want to. Okay, because I want to still, maybe we haven't defined this yet at the metaphysical level, because there is a continuity between any paganism, ancient or modern, or whatever will come 50 years from now. And we did mention this obviously in the last episode, but that is that all paganisms, I think, to be rightly called paganism, are collapse the distinction that we would make between creator and creation, right? And also, I might add, given what Carl just said, there's a collapse of general and special revelation. All experience is special revelation for the pagan, if you want to look at it that way. They don't have a Bible. There's no dogmatic claims, but all of the phenomenal world is revelation of God, right? Because nature is God, right? It is his nature religion. Okay. And I think we have to say it's now we'll have to work out what the average pagan means by nature. Maybe I'll put a capital N on that, but nature is divine. It's probably eternal. It's uncreated. It has many of the attributes of God that we would call the omni attributes, right? There's no creation ex nihilo, right?
Right.
On any pagan worldview, the gods, human beings, everything emerges out of, in the mythological construal, out of something like the divine realm, right? What Yeskel Kaufman in the History of Israelite Religion called the meta-divine, right? You think of all the older myths, out of the primordial soup, or out of the primordial chaos of the waters emerge the gods, right? To put it very succinctly, Michael York, neo-pagan scholar, would say, for the neo-pagan, matter is mater, matter is mother. So just to get down to the ontological, the continuity in it with regards to ontology, ancient or modern or neo, it's, nature is God, nature is divine, and that, whatever nature is, that's what we're worshiping. Yep. That's what we're venerating. That's what we are, and that's what everything else is, and we are not superior or really substantively different from any other feature or modification or mode of nature that we experience. Okay, so animists like Graham Harvey will talk about other than human persons, which then is really going to matter too when we flesh out something like a neo-pagan ethic. But I think, so we want to establish that as fundamental to any paganism is, what what was his name? Peter Jones called One-ism, good old fashioned
Right.
metaphysical monism. Right.
Yep. I appreciate that. In fact, I think that's really important. There is a continuity. You're absolutely right. There's a continuity, and there's a few different streams of that continuity. One of them is that there is a sense of return, or a hope for return, to ancient pagan practices, whether it's Egyptian or Greco-Roman or Nordic or Celtic, without really understanding that, how do I say this? With the acknowledgement that they don't really understand what those truly look like. It's difficult because it's just kind of cobbled together. We're building off of fragments, but it's still this longing to have this connection back to that ancient past. There's that continuity with the worship of nature, the veneration of nature, as that principle of fertility, the concept of how the symbol and the actual thing are really one and the same. The altar and the deity behind the altar are essentially the same, and there is this interplay between the spiritual and the natural world. So I mean, there is these common threads all the way through. In terms of cosmologies, there is an interesting new cosmology within Alexandrian witchcraft, and I'll give you the cosmology now. It's kind of a bizarre cosmology, but it goes like this. Before the universe existed, the goddess looked upon her reflection in the curvature of time and space, had a holy lust for herself, and orgasmed out through her exhaling her breath all of the universe into existence. Poof, that's why we're here.
That's that almost sounds a little bit like Kabbalistic.
Oh, well, and Anthony, of course, there's all kinds of little elements to that in here. I mean, that's one of the interesting parts about modern, especially modern Wicca. If you take a look at what Gerald Gardner was doing, I mean, he was pulling together all kinds of stuff. I mean, he was talking with Crowley, and he had integrated Freemasonry's
and they all
3
started
degrees.
Freemasonry,
Right, especially co-masonry, played around with Rosicrucianism. If it wasn't for Gardner, we wouldn't even probably be talking about any of this stuff. But I mean, he syncretized a pile of Western esoteric thought. And then Alexandrian witchcraft really kind of grabbed a hold of all of that, added in more Kabbalism, because the other stuff has a lot of Kabbalism already, integrated even more of it in. And hello, here we are. Let's take off our clothes, dance in the woods, which is basically what Gardner was doing. He was a bit of a nudist anyways, and feel something and proclaim we have a oneness with nature.
I mean, there is an eclecticism in ancient Rome. I mean, we do seem to think that the Romans were able to adapt or adopt into Roman religion, the religions of the other pagan peoples that they conquered, and just add to the pantheon of gods. I think, when we get to modern paganism and like Gardner, and this is a little bit trickier of a point to make, but I know you guys will grasp this. This dawned on me as I was reading a small book by the philosopher Roger Scruton, who wrote a book called Modern Culture. And it's this idea of, we're living in a time where we have this sort of critical awareness of culture itself, that we think probably wasn't really there in pre-modern times, before the scientific study of, anthropology, sociology, religion and stuff, where we become more and more aware of culture itself, the culture we live in, how cultures are develop over time, and so on and so forth. So when we look back at like Roman religion, Greek religion, folk religions of the Asiatics, the Americas, the African folk religions, etc., we feel like they are fully embedded, and there's not a there's philosophical skepticism in Cicero and whatever, and in the Greeks, Epicurus. But when you look at ancient pagan religion, we have the sense that the ancient pagan, his belief and practice is fully authentic, right? that he really believes in what he's doing when he builds the monument to Zeus or to Athena or whatever. And I think that is a little bit more difficult for us today. So when the pagan goes out to Elfest or Burning Man, it's like, I think we all can have this sense of like, are we just cosplaying here? Is this just pretend? Are we really building these shrines? Like, is it that we really believe, or is it just that we want to believe and it's nostalgic because we feel that we've lost something socially, and maybe even psychologically, as if religion is pushed to the side. So we just feel like we have to do this as a social practice. I mean, this is a conversation in the church as well. Are we just doing this because it gives us social psychological benefits? Right. So I think that sort of critical awareness of culture, religious culture itself, like we have the sense that when we read about the Incas, they built Machu Picchu because they really believed that the temples were to the gods, and that if they didn't do this, the gods would get angry or wouldn't be and so on and so forth, which also affects, I think, our art as well and artistic expression. Are we just creating kitsch, or do we really believe that there's a real sort of spiritual value to the religious art that we create? So that's another area, I think, of discontinuity. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, that was a little bit.
No, that was awesome. That was awesome. It spurred in my mind an experience I had. Speaking about experiences, back in 2017, I believe, when I was at Paganism, and I was at a workshop on the problem of acquiring land for the construction of temples. And the Wiccan giving the lecture or whatever it was, a conversation, workshop, however you want to describe it, was saying, look, here we are in a convention center. Sterile, 4 walls, blank walls. We're not outside. We're not in nature. Because Paganism is an indoor event. It's an indoor conference, a convention of pagans. And he was chastising all of those who were attending and himself as well by going, well, the gods aren't going to be pleased with us. They aren't going to be pleased with us at all. Look at where we are. And the conversation was, how do we attain land? And that's been actually a question with certain groups. How do we attain land so that we can now begin to rebuild temples?
Yeah.
Because that's missing.
Yeah, right. And and maybe, I mean, this is like the question of, could we here in in Southern California get somebody said, we're going to build a Gothic cathedral, like in Chartres or something. You think of there's this great book, Pillars of the Earth, about the building of cathedrals in the Middle Ages, generations and generations of families that lived and died building the cathedrals of Europe. Because it was the whole person was invested spiritually, religiously in the construction of the cathedral. And we said back, could we do that again with the same kind of gravity and seriousness? Could we say we're going to build a church? We're going to a cathedral. Now we could do it much easier these days. But if we did it, would it just be an act of nostalgia for us, just to have something beautiful, or would we be fully invested? So it's interesting. I mean, to think that maybe in these, in the Neo-Pagans, if they really believe we have to build these temples now because our gods really demand it from us, I think that's maybe even a further development or further level of sort of re-enchantment
of the culture that we're living in.
Yeah.
And by the way, Anthony, that conversation has been happening.
Wow, that's interesting.
At the events I've been to, yes, at least on a couple of occasions, workshops specifically diving into that question. So
because
Carl,
the
conversation's there.
Because that, to me, would be maybe an initial indicator that something like an institutional paganism could return.
Right.
And maybe you'd leave behind this sort of very individualistic, and you'd get something more formal.
Even one of the workshops I attended at last year's Paganicon, and this is not the same as temples, obviously, but it fits within the milieu of an institutionalization of these experiences. One of the workshops was on pagan archives, which already there's a number of archives devoted to pagan literature, pagan experiences, and the formalizing of holding that knowledge and putting it forward in a way that can be studied, can be academically accessed. So when I'm hearing things like that, conversation about, hey, can we set up a network of pagan archives, which already is in play, it's already happened, and then grow that pagan archive out, develop it, build it into something bigger. Now you've entered into almost a different phase of it. There's more of a maturing that's coming with it.
Yeah, it's almost like the precursor to like some kind of historical theology or something.
Right. There's something more. All of a sudden, there's a recognition that if we don't institutionalize it, if we don't catalog it, we're going to lose it, especially in an age where that individualism or selfism really kind of plays into the cultural mood, especially in terms of the identity politics that lands within the pagan community as well. So there's some pretty fascinating things happening. And, I mean, some of this is nuanced. The average person probably is like, well, that's, you're walking into the weeds kind of thing. But at the same time, it's reflecting the change that's happening within that particular spiritual subculture. And that's a change that then echoes into our larger culture.
I mean, I don't think it should surprise us if this radical individualism just, obviously, I mean, we're already seeing all the destructiveness of it just at the level of the individual person, right? We're not really built this way. So that, and Peter Berger points out in several of his books this idea that at some point everything institutionalizes and formalizes to some degree, right? Yep. It has to. So absolutely. It should surprise us that the very individualistic, autonomous kind of do-it-yourself paganism, and even do-it-yourself Christianity for that matter, maybe of the 80s, 90s is, and maybe good riddance to it, is starting, at least from our perspective as Christians, is starting to fade out or become less popular.
I want to ask some direct questions because I think we're saying a lot, and you've already answered this maybe, but I think it'll be helpful to try to nail this down if we can. We may not be able to. So do neo-pagans tend toward polytheism or pantheism? I mean, we've talked a lot about oneness, right? The oneness religion and unified religion and the like. But of course, I mean, historically, we can point to concrete examples that we would take to be paganism, and they're very polytheistic. And so that raises a question about, well, is it oneness or is it really a pluralism?
Both.
Well, it's polytheistic pantheism. Yeah. Yep. And maybe those are not contradictory concepts. Maybe using the language of Spinoza here might help. I just read a section on Spinoza in Copleston of there's one divine substance, God, and many modifications of him or her. Right? Modes of being. Right? Mm-hmm. So there are many agents in the divine one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that fits with, Spinoza is a good place to go.
So, I mean, but I think several pagan authors will use the term polytheistic pantheism or animistic pantheism, but none of those are contradictory. Okay. So you can have, it's what are we calling different modifications of the goddess,
Mhm.
of divine nature.
yeah.
I'm writing a lot divine nature, DN, in my book, because that seems to be a good term for me to use, divine
We use-
nature.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
hear a lot about goddess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot about, in ancient paganism, and now we hear a lot of New Agers say feminism is, or the feminine is the future.
So
Right.
to the issue of pantheism versus polytheism, here's an example of how the two will blend. I'm holding here, this is the agenda book for the last Pantheacon. Pantheacon was a long-running gathering of witches and neo-pagans, considered to be probably the largest indoor gathering of witches in the world. And I went to the last one in early 2020, like right before the lockdown, like weeks before the lockdown. And it was held in San Jose, California. So right within the title, Pantheacon, the
Yeah.
conference or the convention on pantheism. Here's a workshop I attended. I'm going to read a section of it. A goddess for every need. Divine feminine in ancient Near East. Every pre-classical culture produced its share of goddesses, including, believe it or not, biblical Israel. In this session, we'll be introduced to both the major and some of the minor goddesses, and then it lists a whole pile of the different goddesses that we'll be talking about. This richly illustrated presentation will close with a bio of the god of Israel's wife, Asherah, and how her divorce changed the history of Western religion. So, underneath the umbrella of pantheism, we took a look at the many goddesses that you could choose to worship or follow from the ancient biblical Near East. It was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. I see a lot of, I have so many questions, so many thoughts. I think, do we distinguish neo-paganism as a revival of the past, a reconstruction, or something new? All of the above, right?
Mm.
Yes.
I would say reconstruction. I would say reconstruction and something new.
Creative reconstruction. How about that?
Yeah,
Innovative, because I think it fits again with the
Uh-huh.
ontology, though, of paganisms. I mean, any act of creativity on the part of the human agent is an act of God. It's a divine act. I mean,
Yes.
you know, the pagan is happy to say all religions have been created, right?
Yeah.
If so when Gerald Gardner writes the Book of Shadows and constructs this eclectic paganism, it's a valid new religion,
Yeah.
even though it's drawn from various sources in the past. But everything's one, everything's connected, right? This is the interconnectedness of everything. So what you've produced is itself, is as valid as any ancient religious expression of the divine one, right? So you can't really you're not really adjudicating between the truth and falsehood of pagan doctrines. Like that's just not a thing, right? You're not saying, well, this doctrine is wrong. This is heresy. I mean, I don't think we can really understand in that kind of, in those terms, right? So you create and you can reconstruct. And there are some groups. I ran into one online and I had a interesting back and forth. He's a Nordic heathen. And he's very much into reconstruction in that they really are trying to get back to as close as possible the worship around Wotan, the god Wotan. And they're really trying to get their hands on the historical sources, whatever archaeological evidence is there, and reconstruct it as close as possible. Of course, a lot of times there's not much to go on, as Carl points out often. But everything's valid. It's valid to create your own expression, because you are part of God. You are godlike. But it's fine also if you feel that it works better to reconstruct a lineage or a heritage that goes back a ways and use that.
Allow me to read a little excerpt from a workshop I attended at Pantheacon. It's entitled Polypantheism, Evolving with the Gods, and this was hosted by the Temple of Growth Advancement, or TOGA. In this discussion, attendees will participate in a typical Reno magic ritual. When calling God and goddesses, they will be invited to call the names of any deities they have a personal connection with, regardless of pantheon. Members of Reno Magic and Toga will share experiences working with individuals from many backgrounds and traditions, including working with pantheons who historically don't get along. Personal gnosis and rewriting personal community mythos, setting boundaries with self and deity, and interacting with those who have different relationships with our gods. That's quite a mix. It's quite a mashup.
Yeah. So there's a lot of confluence between the Neo-Pagan and particularly the newness of it and the kind of individualistic expressionism that we find in our culture right now. So the humanistic, individualistic expressionism. What's the term used? Expression isn't quite right, but that works.
Oh, the Charles Taylor's term.
Charles Taylor's term, or Carl Trueman's term in his Self book,
Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Expressive individualism.
Expressive individualism. Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. That actually, it's a lot of confluence. It fits really well with neo-paganism, but also provides a kind of motor for creating something new.
It makes sense from a human perspective. Everybody has this inclination to look to the past, and to sort of like have a longing for things in the past that maybe we feel have been lost. That's why we read church history, or should read. But then we also focus often on the future, and we look to novelty. I don't really believe that there is anything novel other than technology, but there is just a longing there. I think that we all have, to look backwards to the past, to be fascinated by our ancestors, our predecessors, and maybe even reconstruct something that we think they had that we no longer have, or that we've lost. Eliade speaks about that quite a bit in several of his books. The eternal mythical, right? The eternal mythological kind of, I think that's to be expected, that you'll have both going on at the same time. You'll have the idea of desiring to be novel and express one's own individual take on divine nature, and then cobble together your own kinds of practices. But there's going to be equally the impulse to want to find something from the past and use it and re-employ it, as if you're honoring, the ancestors, right? So, and there are like reconstructed, more like folk religious beliefs and practices as well. I don't know if I mentioned, but think of Black Lives Matter, which was founded by 3 practicing animists, Garza, Tometi, and Cullors, who all practiced Yoruban Ifa spirituality. And ancestor worship plays a big role for them. And when they go out and they do their political activism and they chant the names of these victims who've been killed by the police or whatever, they're actually engaging with the spirits of the people of the dead, they consider them the ancestors. So there's tradition and innovation there.
And then I appreciate the fact, Anthony, that you brought up activism, because activism has played a significant role within at first the burgeoning movement of neo-paganism, and now it's really a full-on part of the experience, or it can be. golly, I think the first one that really comes to mind in terms of that activism was back in the anti-Vietnam War demonstration era, when you had the group, it was called Witch, Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. And they were like a feminist collective that did like almost like guerrilla political theater, where they brought in witchcraft and anti-war activism and went to the Pentagon and tried to help levitate the Pentagon, I think, off of its foundation. And of course, it never actually moved. But that was a symbolic act of us taking our belief system and now integrating it with a sense of political, a political direction, not just simply, it's no longer then at that point just simply purely a nature-based religion, but all of a sudden it takes upon itself like activist political dimensions as well.
Well, I'll give you a very recent example other than Black Lives Matter, which a lot of people, with regards to Black Lives Matter, a lot of Christians were worried about the Marxist component, but very few people looked into what the religious beliefs of the founding mothers actually were. But here's another example just up the road for me in the largest school district in the country, LA County School District. In 2021, there was an educator, school board educator by the name of Quautin, Mexican-American, who took a Nahuatl name, in honor of his Aztec ancestors. And he introduced a lengthy document, I have it on my desktop, introducing a series of chants and incantations and prayers to named folk deities of folk religion. So they had prayers to various Aztec deities, Quetzalcoatl, Chichetopac, other Huitzilopochtli, and others. And then there was also ones. It was under it was categorized as an ethnic studies program, but these were things that the school children K through 12 were supposed to do to start off the school day, to have these chants and incantations to named deities from folk religious mythologies. And this was all to be done for the sake of raising awareness, a critical consciousness of social injustices and forms of marginalization and oppression, right? To liberate the students' minds to all of the social injustice. And that didn't have sort of an anti-Christian component to it, it did. I mean, it very much did, because this is tied in with kind of an anti-colonialist narrative that sees the European colonizers not just as bringing disease and guns and better weapons to native shores, but also bringing Jesus to native shores, which ruined the indigenous religions of the native peoples. So yeah, the activism component is very, very prominent.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not the secretive covens of the 1940s and 50s of Gardner and Crowley. That's right. It has really become a politically and socially active movement.
Yeah, and that is one of the major shifts within the movement itself. The move from that secrecy to the openness, no longer then from the confines of a coven, but now walking into the halls of Congress. That kind of shift, and that's a rapid shift in 80 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember. I think it was in Adler's Drawing Down the Moon. That was in '86, the second edition, where that sort of is a live debate. That was like sort of a debate, like, should we be politically active? Is it about changing society and the world? Or is it really just about individual religious experience out in the woods doing magic? That was a debate. But now, I mean, it's really taken the more social turn, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. And Adler was, I believe her first edition is, what was that, 77?
Something like that. Yeah, about 10 years
something
earlier.
Something like that. I have both. Then I take a look at Celine Fox.
Fox. Yeah.
Yes. My goodness, she was around during the very first Earth Day celebrations in 1970, participated in one of the workshops that I attended back with in PantheaCon, which was the I think that was the 50th anniversary. Yeah, it was the 50th anniversary then of Earth Day. She was making the claim that the Neo-Pagan community was, and herself particularly, was very involved in that early thrust of pushing environmentalism forward as something culturally accepted through the first Earth Day on April the 22nd, 1970. So, yeah, but you're right. Adler really wrestles, or she shows, it demonstrates in her writing that there is this wrestling of, okay, what direction is the pagan community going to be going? Is it going to remain closed, or is it going to change? And we see the fact that it has changed tremendously.
I mean, look, I'm going to keep coming back to, we have the same discussions in the church. Are we supposed to be social activists and get out there and do social justice? Or is it about our personal relationship with God and about, moral, our moral sanctification? And of course, for us, it's both and, right? It's both. But, we see that same kind of debate for us. I mean, we had liberal theology. We had the social gospel where everything was just about, the transcendent, the spiritual, the doctrinal was just sort of sacrificed for the sake of carrying out social justice. But you could have, the other end of the spectrum as well, where we do nothing. No chair, we're not trying to do anything to mitigate or resolve real problems, and we're just about the spiritual component of our Christian faith. But so I think it shouldn't surprise us to see similar interactions about it within this different religion.
Yeah, and that's important I think very important for people to realize. I think, and this is one of my hopes with this conversation that the three of us are having, is that the Christian community can see that there is actually complexity within the conversation of neo-paganism. This is not something, this is not a Hollywood or a version or a Walt Disney version that's cut and dried. This is not Harry Potter. There's something deeper going on that demonstrates a cultural impact, has a political impact, and has its own internal complexities, because it does.
Yeah, and Carl has seen these complexities front and center, live and in person. I've only read about them, but I've read enough about people getting into fights at pagan rituals and disagreements, and then leaving, and then there being big crises of authority, and whether or not they need more rules or less rules. And so, I mean, it's just like, pagans are everybody's human in these equations. So they're having the same kinds of fights, arguments, disagreements, not just at the intellectual level, but just even how to do a ritual, right? There was a funny story, I think, in Adler, about somebody who went over and was participating in one of the Alexandrian rituals, was named after, what was the guy's name? Alexander's and his wife, and they were big at London, witches in London, and nobody knew, like, they got there and everybody was confused and they didn't know what to do, and then they were fighting about who should carry it. It was kind of funny. It's like, it's not like it's not like pagans are some unified entity, where everything works out well and so on and so forth.
And that's, Anthony, really important for Christians to realize, because we have this sense, and when we think of things like spiritual warfare, that there is this unified lockstep group of individuals or people or organizations, whatever, where they're all like, they have bound themselves together and there is an efficiency to what they're doing. They're people, with all the complexities and problems of people.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing to think about in terms of, all right, even in terms of, let's say, the apologetics side of it, that angle. One of the things that I've been trying to tell people, I told my class just last week, is that as Christians, we like to scare ourselves sometimes and we will view the pagan community in language or in a vision where we become fearful and paralyzed to interact with these people, to interact with this movement as ambassadors for Christ, because we have frightened ourselves. We have frightened ourselves. We've created this into a scary story when we've, in a sense, then forgotten who it is that we worship. Who's on, whose side are you on, the creator or, the creation side?
I mean, that isn't to say, of course, and that there aren't very dark manifestations
there are dark.
of the goddess, of which many pagans will, of course, also write about.
Agree. Yeah.
And that there isn't malicious magic, and that there aren't invocations of spirits, obviously, demons that do horrific things.
It's a minefield. It's a dangerous place. Absolutely. Yeah.
That might be easier to even, in a sense, engage with and identify than, I practice white magic and I have my goddess is benevolent and good. We're like, well, wait a second. This is still a goddess, though. This is still like a false spirit or something. I remember years ago, I was just a baby Christian. I was still in the army, and I was doing a little apologetics thing at the church I was at. And there was this young teenage girl who asked a question about Wicca. And I didn't know much. I just read a few apologetics books and everything. And I really feel like I failed her. And this was, again, years ago, because she's like, well, I have a friend, but she practices white magic. And I just kind of said, well, but that's still demons and blah, blah, and I just didn't handle it very well. But she thought that because it was white magic and not dark magic, that, this is healing magic. This is good for people. It's helping people therapeutically, right? So that might even be a little bit harder than if you're getting into what is very obvious, malevolent, dark sort of spiritual practices.
Right, because that is there. Absolutely.
What is the difference between Wicca, witchcraft, and folk magic? Are they all pagan?
They're all pagan, but they are different expressions of paganism. So Wicca is a form of witchcraft. You can be a witch, but not a Wiccan. Mm-hmm. So a lot of solitary practitioners would claim that they're witches, and they're witches. And they'll maybe follow the work of, let's say, Scott Cunningham and some of his ideas of being a sole practitioner, or they'll have maybe followed after something else, maybe called, what was it? Modern traditionalism. That's one other branch. And they don't identify with the Wiccan movement. Now, Wicca is formed out of the work of a particular man, Gerald Gardner. It goes back to the 1940s. It has 3 defined degrees. It has a more defined set of rituals, a more defined set of practices, or at least it historically has. Now that too is again, there's some blurring of the lines between what happens with the sole practitioner and what happens in a coven, because it can become a very eclectic spiritual experience, where you're sampling. Wicca very much is involved in focusing on the goddess.
The goddess.
So, yes, that's a key component of Wicca versus, let's say, witchcraft, which maybe, let's say the person's involved in reconstruction of a Greco-Roman form of witchcraft and says, hey, I want to invoke Zeus, or I want to invoke Nike, or, along those lines. And you'll be like, oh, well, those are male deity figures, not a goddess figure. And in Wicca, the goddess is a key part of their spiritual experience and beliefs and practices.
Do we hear much about male goddesses in the public sphere right now?
Male gods? Oh,
male gods. That's what I meant. Yeah, male gods. Do we?
In the ethno-pagan spheres, yes.
Yeah. So ethnicity focused paganism.
Which are mainly. Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're probably getting more of those in the Scandinavian countries.
Yep, 100%.
I don't know how to say it. Asartu. It's weird spells. Asatru. So, and these can be very racist, like in the traditional sense of the term, in the real sense of the term, that, like where our gods preference our race, right? And racial purity is demanded or desired and demanded by the group, and they specifically worship and venerate these, especially Nordic deities. Yeah. So ethnic reconstruction.
Okay.
Tied in with the spiritual, the worship of gods of that place, of that geographical
That's
area.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so more geographically located paganisms that are influenced by blood and soil would not be masculine tending.
What
typically?
Well,
would it be more feminine? I mean, certainly in the West, in our pagan, it seems to me what we've been saying here is that there's a tendency toward goddess worship. There's a kind of, which has an affinity to all these variant egalitarian expressions that are morphing in our Western culture right now, that are dominating political policies, academic practices, educational practices, et cetera, et cetera. It all tends toward this idea, this amalgamation idea that seems to come together somehow, and the feminine is the future.
That
feminine is dominating right now, in terms of like in terms of the U.S. right now, right? I mean, in terms of the pagan practice.
I see that, Carl. The retrieval of the goddess, I see in my reading, Carl, correct me if I'm wrong here, I see as really a reaction to Christianity. That is part of the reaction against Christianity, whereby you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the Trinity is construed as a male deity, right? Certainly Christ incarnates as a historic man. But, we would want to maintain that the Father is rightly called Father, even though obviously he's pure spirit. But that a lot of the desire to recapture the feminine in modern paganism is a reaction against the idea that Christianity has to be rejected along with its masculine God.
Interesting. You see,
I mean,
you see
all
this,
of it, but there's a reaction there, I think, because there's nothing inherent in paganism that says the emphasis couldn't be on the God, some God.
And I think too that fits into the influence too of Gerald Gardner, because he's the spark that lights the whole brush fire, so to speak, in terms of creating modern day witchcraft, specifically Wicca, but really the influence is deep and wide within the Neo-Pagan movement. And his emphasis was on the goddess. And then you see in the late 1960s, you see the rise of feminism, of more of the liberal leftist feminism that emerges, and importantly, within the scientific realm, the Gaia Hypothesis is being fleshed out in the late 1960s, and then in the early 1970s, the Gaia Hypothesis lands pretty big in certain academic circles, even though James Lovelock wasn't at first bringing it out as he wasn't really believing that the Earth had a spirit, was fundamentally alive. He was using it as more of a metaphor. It gained traction, nevertheless. It all of a sudden had this sense of opening up the space of a conversation. Well, maybe the Earth is alive, and maybe it's all infused with spirit. And the Gaia Hypothesis moves from scientific conversations about processes and systems into something even more spiritual and metaphysical.
Wow.
This idea in my head isn't fully fleshed out, but so there are male and female expressions of the deity of divine nature, right? Okay. When you look at there's an incredible book, my number one book of last year. I think I plowed through 52 some odd books, and this was by far the most interesting one I read. It was called Hitler's Monsters, The Supernatural Beliefs of the Third Reich by Eric Kurlander, which really shifted my paradigm on what the Nazis they would really believe. Now, the Nazis, when they would speak of the soil, the land, they would speak in feminine terms, often. The mother that gives birth to the German spirit, right? The German soul. But they also had ideas of a masculine deity as well from the Eddas, from the Germanic folklore. So you might have been Wotan or Thor or one of these Germanic deities. So there were both, but it was often the case that even the Nazis, who would think of hyper-masculine, blah, 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 they still revered like Mother Earth. Right, the land and the soil was often spoken about and construed in even with the term Vaterland, right, which fatherland. But there's still a lot of religious language that they use to describe the earth in these terms of because you think of it nurturing, it provides for us. So it's kind of natural to think of the land itself in sort of these more motherly ways, which a lot of the Greek goddesses also are. Series of the god of agriculture and so on and so forth. So I think it's just a matter of emphasis. Yeah. It really is. Both are valid to describe the god, and a lot of the literature I read, they'll write God \des when they're speaking of the divine nature, right? God \des, just it covers all the bases.
I'm glad you brought up the Nazi element. My goodness, that there's a few books well worth diving into with that. My friend Mark Musser's book Nazi Oaks, highly recommend, as it bridges the neo-pagan component of Nazism with political environmentalism. And does a remarkable job of showing how important the green arm of the Nazi movement was, and it was very, very pagan. And there's a few others I can think of as well, but very important side to this conversation.
Tell me, let's talk about ritual a little bit more, and space, and how pagans understand that. What is real? What is real for the pagan? Is there any overlap that we can point to between the different variants of paganism? What is real in terms of, and what are rituals actually doing?
Yeah, I'll make one point. Carl's going to have probably better data on this than me, but just to go back to, again, the idea of continuity, I think we can say, and York says this, and I think Eliade points it out as well, like two things that are fundamental to any paganism, new or old, are going to be the ritual, the religious or ecstatic ritual. And of course, there'll be various expressions of that in various forms, giving culture time and place. But and then also the other, we mentioned witchcraft, witchery, but just maybe the even broader term would just be magic. Magic use, right? The use of magic, and then there, you could come up with 2 or 3 different types of magic that will take place in a ritual. Like there's oftentimes let's just call it high magic, which is throughout cultures takes place in the ecstatic ritual, and that's this idea of really transcending one's own self and connecting with the greater universe, right? With the cosmos, right? Yeah. And then having kinds of experiences of time and space and altering perception of reality, of what is real. Okay, high magic. And then there's sorcery, right? Which is like doing little rituals to get something you want. to like have an immediate effect. So like you think like in the Middle Ages, tying a knot at the end of the bed sheet so that, you know, a child would be produced that night, you know, if when the married couple got together, or throwing a little blood over the crop so they would grow. So like magical incantations and rituals to produce an effect. So within the ritual, the ecstatic ritual, in my reading of this, so usually what's being aimed for is something like the first kind, the high magic, the shaman, the magician, the witch, trying to sort of transcend the individual embodiment of the goddess to have this more expansive access to the divine realm, right? So I'll start with that, and then I'll let Carl get into more.
Gosh, that's a lot. Yeah.
Carl, would you agree with that? Magic and ritual,
Yeah,
you know, just in general.
Yeah, no, I would, and you know, Joshua, that's a big question. It really is the purpose of ritual. I mean, we can ask this question even within the realm of Christianity.
Right.
Sure.
Why do we do certain things? What's the point? What's the purpose? Within the Neo-Pagan world, when you're thinking about ritual and you're thinking about magic, and ritual is really, in a sense, you're trying to act or put pressure upon the all, the supernatural all that exists and is embedded within all of nature. So you're trying to exert will and interact with it. A lot of it is spiritual imagination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A lot of spiritual imagination. So, and I've sat through, I don't know, 12, 15 different rituals, some very, very elaborate, some quite small and simple. One that had bloodletting involved, and the doors are actually locked, and people were told, hey, as witches, they were told, if blood and what we're going to be doing bothers you, here's your moment to leave. Once the ritual begins, the doors are closed, nobody in, nobody out. Really serious stuff.
Mm.
Nevertheless, even in all of that, there still is this sense of imagination that comes into it. So I'll give you an example, the cone of power. You've created this circle around maybe the altar, around the fire, and you've got this cone of power, this cone of energy that you imagine is now enveloping you and moving upwards. Well, is it really there?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really a cone of power that's encircled you and your group as you're going around the altar or going around the fire? Is there really a cone of power? To the point of, imagine if you have to leave, let's say you have to use the washroom. If you have to leave the cone of power, take your alchemy, your knife, and ceremoniously cut a hole, cut a door in the wall of the power that's wrapped around, leave, and then as you re-enter, seal the door up. But there's no door. This is an act of imagination, and you are participating in something that, with your imagination, that now you are imbuing with it some type of special power.
Mm-hmm.
And you're creating, I believe in your mind, you're creating that sense of we have now entered a sacred space. This is a sacred activity. These are sacred actions. And they're sacred because I agree they're sacred. And with my group or on my own in the ritual, I will perform all of these actions because it creates this special space.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the mundane. This is a step out of the normalized world. And now in this moment, I'm feeling and experiencing something, even if it is so much of it based upon, let's say, creative imagination or spiritual imagination.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes way beyond. I was in a workshop with a practitioner. He's a Gardnerian Wiccan, and he was talking, and his wife was in the room. He was talking about the Great Invocation when they were involved in the Great Invocation, which is a ritual, and the goddess did come down, and the goddess did walk in. And all of a sudden, the other person that was there, the goddess was right inside of that person and has now manifested with a complete change in that person's natural character everything from the demeanor changing to the voice, the whole bit. You're like, okay, yeah, something did happen. You are asking for something, and it happened because there is a supernatural reality, and that side of it is willing to play with you, or use you if you so engage.
Yeah, I mean this kind of gets into the question, like when the Neo-Pagan goes into the room or the ritual. I mean, in some of the literature, the Neo-Pagan will say that the God can be a psychological projection. That doesn't make the God any less real,
right?
Because a psychological projection, again, is an expression of divine nature, right?
Right. The symbol equals the entity, or the symbol equals the action.
Yeah,
right.
Everything is divine. Everything is positive. It's already divine. So now, but it could also be that there is a mind independent, a non-projected entity that is also called upon and that shows up. There's a fascinating account of in Murphy Pizza and Tom's Edward, the Handbook of Contemporary Paganism, in one of the chapters on the Wild Hunt Challenge, about a woman named Jo Crow who, in the woods somewhere in England, inside the Wild Hunt ritual, has wolf enter into her. And I mean, it's a harrowing account of, I mean, now she appreciates that wolf entered into her. And, at some point she talks about how somebody was trying to sort of walk her down, bring her back to mundania, as Sarah Pike, right? And she almost bit the guy's head off, in her embodiment of the spirit of wolf. So that might be more than just mental projection. And I think we can fit that into our Christian worldview, fairly easily, actually. Right. So, mental projection, imagination, and the idea of, an independent being that's being invoked, it's still all of the same stuff. I think it's all the same substance and the same stuff at the end of the day.
Yeah, then I'll add one more side of that, and that is the realm of suggestibility. So as you're going through some of the literature, especially literature dealing, let's say, with, I'll just give you an example. Last year, one of the books I read was this, and so often it was
interesting.
Yeah, and it was interesting. It was interesting, but and so much of Weber's book fit within the genre of modern pagan literature, and that was in describing this deity. A lot of the terminology is being used like maybe, could be, might be, and the book is loaded with that kind of language because that's where it's at. You're talking in abstracts, and you're trying to make it manifest into reality. And this is that part of that imagination, the psychological side. But from the biblical point of view, there is a real spiritual worldview, a real spiritual side that's being, in a sense, tapped. Hi, we're here, and we want you. We invite you. That kind of notion. But the language of suggestibility, I've seen this a lot, and not just in the literature, but observing some of the rituals as well.
Okay, there's a lot. This is a lot. Okay, I'm getting a bit overloaded. Let me, and hopefully I can say that. Hopefully, our listeners, maybe they'll feel this way too. So let me try to make some sense out of this as a kind of layman on paganism. Okay. Well, I feel like I'm both an expert and a layman of paganism at the same time, because paganism is really everywhere. It's all, I mean, we kind of joke. I mean, I joke with my wife sometimes when she's, reading something or other, she makes some comment and I say, yeah, that's pagan. That's pretty pagan, right? It's kind of it's a colloquialism, but there's some truth in it, right? I mean, right? There's some truth in it. everything that's anti-Christian is basically pagan, right?
Yeah, I'm almost true, I'd say.
I'm joking, but I think there's some truth in that,
Islam,
right?
You know,
Right? Unless it's Islam. Okay, yeah. Well, that's something altogether different. Maybe that's different. Okay, but yeah, everything's pagan. I say that jokingly, but
pagan too, so.
maybe Islam's pagan too.
That would be
okay.
an interesting discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to go too far down this alley. I think we're going to devote some time to magic more so in the future, as well as demonism, spiritualism, and the like, and those are all related here. But many thoughts are going through my head in terms of paganism and ritual and what's real and what's not. So as a Christian, I mean, ancient Christians have always had kind of liturgical practices and rites and rituals, and I mean, even Baptists today have some rituals of some sort. I mean, and symbols that they deeply imbue with meaning I mean, even if you press them hard enough, they wouldn't blend the common and the secular and the sacred too much. Where even many times Baptists have a sense of like there's something important going on when we come into the kind of the sanctuary, if you want to call it that, or this space where we worship, and we set this space apart. As an Anglican, like when I have to use common space a lot because we're, doing this church plant. So I will regularly pray to God the Father. Hey, I want to set this space apart. I don't know what this space has been used for before. I mean, I'm not saying Dungeons and Dragons is bad. We could go down that track, but we had this table has been used. People have used it to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? And some other stuff. And so I pray over this space if I'm going to use it, and I'm consecrating it, to use for the Christian God, right? So we have some distinctions. I mean, there's certainly a direction that's different. There's some sort of content that's different that's being kind of directed at, the ritualistic practices, hopefully, although those get blended, right? There's magic is, I mean, the way Dean Radin defines magic, and hopefully we'll get into this more later because I think this is fascinating. My understanding of magic, and I think this is maybe going on here too, to some degree, and listeners are probably going to come at this from this perspective. Magic is effectively bad and pagan for the most part, and that maybe there's a lot of truth in that. At the same time, the way Radin defines magic could be perfectly like compatible. Certain types of magic could be compatible with Christianity. Okay, so in this way, right? I mean, if we think that something is going on, you're good Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, or even Anglican, or Reformed maybe, something's going on in the Lord's Supper. When you pray over it, something happens to it, right? We're taking these natural elements and saying that something supernatural is occurring. Well, on Dean Radin's definition of magic, he would say, well, that's magic. There's something about the mental and the immaterial that's interacting with the physical in a unique way that falls under the rubric of magic itself. Okay, so that's fine and fair. That if you define it that way, there's nothing necessarily pagan or necessarily kind of negative or immoral about it. I mean, typically when I think of magic, I think that magic is immoral, right? But not necessarily, right? So I'm throwing a lot out at you at once because I have all these thoughts. I'm a liturgical Christian, so like I believe that we should have these ritualistic practices that are right and healthy and good and God honoring and the like. So there must be some other things that distinguish kind of pagan ritual practice and Christian practice. Where was I going with that?
So magic. Good or bad? Magic, good or bad? Yeah, magic
is good or bad. Is magic good or bad? Is magic bad? I mean, we're called to entertain angels in Hebrews. We're called to, in Ephesians, I interpret Paul as talking about like a spiritual realm that whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not, at some level, we're entertaining the spiritual realm I remember in my Reform context, we almost never talked about ghosts and spirits or demons or the like. I remember in my spiritual formation class, I was asked my teacher, okay, so we have the sin out there and we have like the environment. What about demons and stuff like that? And the Reform teacher would say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. You need to worry more about your own sin. And I learned later on as a Calvinist, like that's a very strong characteristic of Calvinistic theology. And, right.
But by the way, I think I'd say in all my readings of former Christians who have become witches, most have come either out of Roman Catholicism or some form, or Calvinism.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, that I could see.
And the ones who come out of Calvinism seem more bitter towards Christianity than the Roman Catholics, who still sort of like to hold on to some of the more sacramental or aspects of Roman Catholicism and mysticism. But that's just a side note.
Well, you could see, I mean, it makes sense to me why that would be the case for Roman Catholics in a different way.
Yeah,
because they're so sacramental, so nature religion. I mean, if they get disillusioned with Roman Catholicism, what are they going to turn to if they still have some sort of great appreciation for nature and its powers?
Yeah,
right. That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
And Mary can quickly become a goddess as well, and things like that too. But I don't want to harp on Roman Catholic friends too much.
Yeah, right.
But,
yeah.
So on the issue then of ritual and magic, and I think there's something important to recognize here, that the desire for something extraordinary and something special in our devotion exists within the human experience, regardless of where you're at. You can see this within every religion, even non-religious practices could carry some of these kinds of flavors. You want something. That's why we go on vacations and we wanted to have some experience. Burning Man is a prime example. You can be completely secular. You're going off to Burning Man. Why are you going off to Burning Man? You want something unique, something special. There's something that's different than the average day-to-day life, and it imparts some type of meaning because you have stepped out of the normality of your life. You've taken the time to engage in something that should cause you to reflect, or should cause you to now experience something. So I'm thinking of a ritual, even let's say within the Christian church. I don't come from a liturgical background. My background is very different that way. Much of it in terms of, let's say, ceremony or ritual would be the act of remembrance. We are doing this in remembrance of. We do this to have your mind changed because you're remembering what Christ has done.
Yeah.
So I look at ritual and I'm seeing that there is a commonality within the human experience to desire something that sets it apart, something that sets apart that very special time and space. What is the purpose, though? What is the meaning behind it? Are you trying to now use a Nietzschean will to power and force the universe to do something for you? Or are you engaged communally in an action that is cause you to remember what Christ has done? A reflection versus a demand. I mean, these are just little parts and pieces. I'm just thinking out loud as we're contemplating some of this.
Yeah. So no, that's helpful. I think some would see like liturgical practice as something that has been inherited, given to us by God, and so there's certainly a content difference. There's certainly a directional difference, maybe a dispositional difference. Hopefully, a humble difference of recognizing the creator-creature distinction in the context of that ceremony, where otherwise it might be for self-centered kind of, what's the right word? I mean, there's something sinister about cajoling the spirits and utilizing them for your own kind of ends. And at least in theory, kind of praying a prayer that is imbued with Christian wisdom, recognizing who God is in the act and in relation to the place that you're at or something like that. I don't know.
Right. On the issue of devotionalism, because there'll be some who will say, well, because we are worshiping Yahweh, because we are acknowledging Jesus Christ, there is a devotional difference. Devotion is something more personal about devotion than just simply claiming because I have followed this particular pattern, I'm more devoted than you. I have watched at a pagan event where one of the speakers was talking about his devotion and veneration of Pan, the deity Pan, to the point of watching the tears flow down his face, and his speech was one of deep reverence, as he describes how he would go into his backyard in the evening with a glass of the finest wine and pour it out on the ground in his love and devotion and the veneration he has towards Pan, and how deeply Pan loves him back. And I was watching at this man with this level of devoted emotional appreciation, and I'm going, wow, I wish I would see sometimes that level of devotion within the Christian context as we consider our Lord and Savior, where we are drawn to tears just describing that relational affection.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Right.
That is good. And that it's kind of a softer story about what seems like a genuine devotion to a pagan god. I would just point out, and this is not to sort of like diminish the genuineness of that man's emotions or his whatever, but the Nazis would have had a similar kind of devotion to the idol of race.
Yep.
They were, and there's a speech that Himmler gives to the SS. It's recorded in from good cruelty to good. I forget the philosopher's name, Haley. Where he talks about this speech that Himmler gave, addressing these SS soldiers, and about the devotion to the cause of racial purity. So the same level of devotion there, but
absolutely,
even if manifested differently between those two.
Absolutely. And the point I was trying to make with that, and you actually emphasize that point, is that devotion isn't something unique to the Christian experience.
Yes.
And so we can't use devotion in terms of comparing and contrasting that ritual, worshipful element, and as somehow claim that because we are devotional, we have this deep love or this deep relationship.
The Romans attributed their military and imperial success to their piety, to their piety, to their piety to the gods.
Yep.
They thought they were more pious than the Greeks and more pious than the other groups around them, and that's why they were more the more religious ones.
Right. So now, when we think through the apologetic side of how we need to engage. I hope this is actually helpful, because we realize that, all right, that's an area that we really can't dive into unless we want to use it from a comparative point of view to say, yes, we are ritualistic, or we all have that tendency or that desire to engage in devotion, to engage in worship, to engage in veneration. We now have different objects of that, however.
Yeah. No, that's good. So I have a friend who is who was deep into dark magic, and she, when she converted and became a Christian, she became a Roman Catholic, and she'll say that it's no wonder that these lesser practices are trying to imitate what is genuine or what is rightfully true ritual that's seen in Roman Catholic practice. And so what actually attracted her when she became a Christian, she became a Roman Catholic.
Mhm.
What attracted her to Roman Catholicism was what she saw as legitimate right and practice. And witchery is a kind of a fallen, kind of deeply selfish, morbid, kind of corrupted kind of ritualisms that are ungodly, obviously.
Well, think of it this way. Aleister Crowley's famous definition of magic is, now I'm going to finish, bending, bending nature in conformity with the will. Something like that, Carl? Bending nature. I don't know if it's bending, but changing nature in conformity with the will. All right?
Yeah, a Nietzschean approach.
Now, contemporary pagans might want to have a more reciprocal kind of understanding of magic, where it's like, I ask nature and nature returns to me, something like this. Okay, more moderated, but it's still about the human will. Well, let's just go to the Lord's Prayer. Thy will be done on heaven as it is in heaven, so on earth. So that's so it's about whose will are we asking to be done? And, the famous C.S. Lewis quote, is it our will involved in trying to attain the object of desire? Or are we asking God to, are we petitioning God for his will to be done? Right. So that's just at the level of which agent do we think is in control or should be in control? Yeah. Do we think we should be in control? Or do we think God should be in control? Now, again, we'll have to be careful there, because a neo-pagan would have a response to that, especially in this more reciprocal sense.
Right.
With regards to ritual, I mean, think of it this way. Let's take the Roman Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation. Maybe this is just a mental picture for people. For the pagan, there's no need for the priest to do any blessing to the elements. They're already divine, right? Again, just coming back to that. The bread and the wine don't need to be changed into something else. They already are God. Okay, so, that's maybe, they're already sacred. I agree with Jacques Ellul had a very good analysis that I think we should see Genesis 1 from the start of the Bible, that a part of the biblical revelation is the desacralization of the created order, right? So that we get a understanding of the distinction between the transcendent God of creation and that which is contingent and made, right? So, this is why I grew up Roman Catholic. It's difficult. It can be challenging in more liturgical. I think the reformers were, careful about this. It can be challenging to us, as again, I'd say almost natural pagans, Romans 1:18-32, to confuse where sacredness is. Where is sacredness? Is it in the object itself? No, the object is there to remind us of that which is sacred. If there's anything sacred in the world, as Ellul points out, it's us, because we're made in God's image. Human beings are sacred, but we really cannot say and be Christians that objects in the world are sacred. I don't think we should say that. So maybe we got to make a distinction between sacramental and sacred.
Right.
Those get confused.
And then to the point of, like Josh, you were talking about how you would see a pagan ritual in terms of, let's say, moralistically, it's evil, it's wrong, it's from their point of view. No, they would see it as beneficial to the earth, beneficial to the planet, beneficial to the natural environment around them. It really boils down to, and I think this is so important, that creation-creature distinction.
Yep.
I'm looking even at the model prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. It begins with an acknowledgement of that distinction. There is this distinctive element between God and the rest of creation. And so it's an important thing I think that's a really important part that has to continually be referenced, that this is really that, on the pagan side, it again boils down to this worship of nature.
Yeah.
Asking that question, is nature divine? If all the universe is divine, or, big, I like how you said it earlier, Tony, big N nature. If it's all divine, well, we're just, ritual becomes a tool to bend it to your will.
Well, and guys like, Eric Steinhardt in his contemporary pagan, he puts it, look, anytime we do anything in conformity by will, we could say that we're using magic. Drinking water to slake our thirst could be considered magic on that definition of bending nature, changing nature in conformity to our will. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's natural to us to do magic, in that if that's all it is. So if there are more effective, more efficient, more powerful ways of doing the same thing, then for the pagan, there's not really a problem between drinking a glass of water and doing the great rite, or something.
Yeah. Which is why you see in Ferguson's famous book, New Age book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, she gives an illustration of watching a boy drinking milk and making the claim that all that was happening was God was pouring God into God.
Yeah. That's helpful. Okay. Yeah. That's helpful. So there's a conflation of creator-creature, nature, supernature, a conflation of who we are in relation to the divine, and certainly, to put it simplistically, there's a constant sort of practice that's conflating these things, of which, you might argue that the traditional liturgies, like the Book of Common Prayer that I would practice, the Lord's Prayer is the first thing you pray, at least privately as a priest, before you enter into the Eucharist service, or the Lord's Supper service. You would pray the Lord's Prayer, because there's a recognition that the natural elements themselves are creatures. The creatures themselves are something only creatures by way of being created by God, and whatever they amount to in terms of the elements, even the elements in the Lord's Supper, are creatures themselves. Yeah, but there's a conflation there. Yeah, there's an interesting. Yep.
So something that for us, when we take a look as Christians, this distinction, we have been often maligned. In fact, the environmental movement maligns Christians as by saying we have this distinction between creation and creature, and have been given the mandate of stewardship over creation, that we devalue creation. Nothing is further from the truth. We should, as Christians, have a value on creation because of the one who made it. Just like the artist who creates a painting, there is both a value in the art and a higher value in the artist. And I think that's also another point that we need to be looking at in terms of how we answer the criticisms of the world without going, oh, you're right, we're wrong on this, we have to change, which incidentally is what the churches were doing after the first Earth Day, because April 22nd, 1970, the charge was leveled firmly on the Christian community. You're responsible for the environmental woes. What was the church's response? You must be right.
Yeah.
And we followed what the world prescribed then. So we need to be able to say, hold on, we actually have a value. We should have a theology of creation, always pointing first and foremost to who is the creator, recognizing that is where value derives. In fact, there is no value without distinctions. And we see that God is the one who brings distinctions into play in Genesis chapter 1, including the distinction of humans over the animal world. Yet we're still part of the creation, but there is a distinctual value that is of paramount importance. And so I think that also is part of, I keep saying I think, I have to stop that. It is part of the important conversation in terms of the apologetic nature of how we respond to the charges leveled against the Christian community.
Yeah, that's good.
You know, I think we need to do an episode just on environmentalism and Christian response, pagan challenge and Christian response, because that has dominated so much of the theological literature in the last 30 years.
Right.
Well, and a lot of it has been really bad. Stuff. So some of it good, but the majority I think is just, okay, we'll change. We must be wrong. You've issued this challenge, Lynn White Jr. in 1967 or whatever. And we Christians, we, the church, will have to totally redo our theology of creation, doctrine of creation and stuff. So I have to run, but that would be another episode.
That would be good.
Charles just got so much material on environmentalism. We did an excellent podcast a couple of years ago with him on that, and there's just so much there. But I think that's a big area of intellectual academic engagement that needs to be repaired, in a sense almost.
Yeah, good. Well, should we bring it around to we didn't even get to touch on sufficiently authority and knowledge in paganism, and I was going to explore.
No,
I was going to explore the idea. You did highlight this in the beginning, both of you and Anthony specifically, about how it's a nature religion and a nature revelation. And so I was hoping to explore that further. There's a lot that comes to mind in terms of my engagement in America compared to my engagement in Europe, which tends to be much more inclined to natural revelation than it is in America, in the circles that I was running in. So I would actually joke, like, okay, after a while, like I'm in America, I'm getting an itch. I want to go hang out with my European friends, and I want to talk more about philosophy and natural revelation, because we don't have that much here, it seems like. We have all Bible here. And then Bible, when I go and I hang out with the Europeans, and I'm like, this is good. We need metaphysics. We need metaphysics. This is really good. This is really good. But I'm like, okay, you guys don't have enough Bible. I need to get back to America now.
What does Paul say again? Like, you guys want to look at that Greek or not? Yeah.
Well, and I hope down the road, maybe we need to look at this as well in terms of that authority concept, the rise of pagan publishing.
Yeah.
Which all of a sudden brings it. Bingo, Llewellyn #1, but Weiser as well. And there's a few others, but Llewellyn's #1. And the role that has played in moving it from the shadows into the open.
Mainstream.
100%.
There's a good book called Witchcraft Goes Mainstream by Brooks Alexander, who was in the 60s. And he talks about that, just the propagation of materials. Right. Through bookstores and Barnes and Nobles, and you go to the metaphysics side, like Joshua said, and it's all, just more and more. And then of course this would be another is the targeting of youth, especially young women, right? And the whole 90s phenomena, 80s and 90s phenomenon of, mainstream images and books and shows and TV shows and movies, that whole kind of pop cultural sort of explosion of witchcraft and magic and everything. So,
there's a lot going on.
My goodness. Yeah.
But, at least in this conversation, my hope with this conversation is that for those who are listening, and for us as well, the three of us, it will spur us on to begin to think deeply how we can begin to engage and answer. To see this as not just simply a simplistic challenge that we have to face, but that there is complexity, that there's nuance. And then behind all of this, there's people. And now how do we respond here with grace and with truth? because they both have to come together as we're dealing with the complexity, the nuance, and also the personality. And godly wisdom is what's required.
Wow. You just, that was just
You did
a
it
nice
again,
conclusion.
Joshua.
You did it again. Did you plan that? Did you mean that?
No, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
that was a
This
good
is just-
conclusion. I was
Okay.
about to ask a very controversial, provocative question that I didn't expect you to answer right now, but that was a good conclusion. We should probably end on that note. That was good.
Excellent. Wonderful.